Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Ashlee Vance. Ashlee is the host and writer of the tech travel show Hello World for Bloomberg. Is the author of the New York Times and International bestseller Elon Musk Tesla, SpaceX, and the Quest for a Fantastic Future. His new book, When the Heavens Went on Sale, The Misfits and Geniuses Racing to Put Space Within Reach, recently just came out. Ashlee, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is so exciting. You sent me your book not too long ago. I devoured it, and I can't wait to talk about it. But before we go there, could you share with us 3 words that, for you, capture the essence of space?
Yeah, I try to put some thought into this. I think these 3 apply particularly maybe to my frame of reference after working on this book. I would say exhilarating, irrational, and inevitable.
If you had, once, in 10 years, if you have the opportunity of going to the moon or taking a trip to Mars, given that you get to bring your kids and the family, would you do it?
Oh man, you're adding the kids and the family in there. I would not do the kind of Blue Origin 6 minutes, to the edge. That one, I don't know. It's expensive. It doesn't appeal to me. Yes, the moon, a lap around the moon, a little bit of an extended stay. I would for sure do it. If it's on a SpaceX rocket, I would feel pretty good. I don't know if I'm ready to send the kids up on that yet. We're getting close, though. We're getting close. I mean, SpaceX, they've got a pretty good track record at this point.
And the price,
there's a lot of it's a lot of eggs in one basket, though.
Agree. Ashlee, I think that you're probably, of all my guests, you're probably the best person to answer the following question, because you've been at it, from behind the scenes for 10 years plus and really a front row seat. What do you think? I mean, as you know, and because you've been covering it, there's a science story of going to space, all the science benefits. There's a technology story. There are the economics of, what it will bring for space, for corporations, and also for the Earth. But I think that beyond that, what is the human story of going to space?
Well, for me, this is going to be a long answer. There's a couple steps to this. I think the near term human story in space, even though people do put so much attention on the tourism and building the colonies on Mars, I mean, the whole reason I wrote this book and make my argument is the real story of space right here, right now, is building this economy in low Earth orbit, and we're about to put up. People in your audience probably know this. I don't think regular people know this at all, which is we're about to go from 2,500 satellites to 100,000 satellites, maybe even more, in pretty short order. And so I think this story is about building a computing shell around the Earth. I think it's about, I liken it to the .com build out. This is the next stage of our technological build out. This idea we've had for ages about the internet being this kind of digital pulse blanketing the Earth. That is happening. We are going to be able to study our planet from above in ways we never could before. There's going to be new science, possibly new manufacturing. So anyway, all of that is like this very tangible, exciting economy. To me, in the longer term, so much about space. It's obviously this frontier we can still explore, which just plays so much into human nature and our desires to kind of see what we can do as a species to break new ground. And then, not to get super, I don't know how philosophical this is, but the way things are trending with artificial intelligence, with things like that I cover as well, like brain computer interfaces, all of that. I mean, if the human species is successful and we don't destroy ourselves, yeah, I think the story is really about spreading human intelligence out through the universe. If we do have some stab at immortality in some sense, it has to happen through space in this exploration.
Now, I have a feeling that where we are right now is similar to where in the 1900s you have Edison, Tesla, the Wright brothers that were kind of going at each other, racing to redefine the world of tomorrow, and the same kind of rhetoric of people blaming them is that, what a waste of energy, what a waste of talent, a waste of resources, trying to do things that is totally irrelevant to the world, at that point. But the world that they did create actually solved a lot of the problems that they were looking to solve. If you had written put yourself back in the 1900s and following Tesla and Edison and all these crazies of that time, the Wright brothers, do you think that you would have found the same kind of stories that you've written over the years within the space and the tech industry?
Wow, that's a tricky question to answer. I seem to be like, I don't know what it is inside of me, but it's drawn to those types of people. I mean, outside of space, I just seem to cover quite eccentric inventors, no matter where they are in the world. If I had been in the same job, I mean, what an exciting time it would have been to. It's interesting, right? I mean, right now we have so much invention and so many tools at our disposal that let all kinds of new people create interesting things. At the same time, there's always been this argument to be made that we're maybe pretty far along the invention tree, and we're really not coming up with huge new ideas anymore. That sort of the bigger ideas came before, and the time period you outlined is one of the best for sort of really in short order a number of world changing ideas. So I don't know. I think I probably would have been drawn to that. I think writ large, you'd have to be lucky to be in the right place at the right time to have those people in your backyard, because these days I can just hop on a plane and go find some interesting eccentric inventor just about anywhere, and I don't think that was always the case.
Now, you've just talked about being at the right place at the right time. You've been covering Musk and Planet and Astra and all the different players. In 2021, I wrote about how like timing was such an important factor. Like, had Elon Musk, been born 10 years earlier, not stayed in South Africa, not make it to Stanford, all this would have been different. From so from your perspective, how much is that timing and that piece of luck so important in the results and the achievements of all these people now that are redefining, the space industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, for Elon and where he was coming in, because we're talking like 20 years ago when he's starting SpaceX. I mean, there's all the stuff that goes into it beforehand that you mentioned, sort of his life and getting enough money to have a go at something like this. But that was like right at the cusp where computing power, materials, things, people had tried to make a go of it at rockets before, and gotten pretty far. I'm talking about sort of rich people outside of governments, but not everything wasn't sort of lined up to really make a strong go of it. And Elon hit that time really well. I think now everything's so much better that, like in the book, one of the main stories is about Peter Beck, who's this guy from New Zealand who started Rocket Lab, and it's a incredible story that I think gets to the point of what you're talking about, which is this guy did not even go to college. He's just kind of like a obsessive engineer who happened to dabble in rockets as a hobby and and propellants in his shed. He's in a country that has like no aerospace experience really to speak of at all. So there's no talent to lean on. There's no industry set up really to support him, and he was able to make a rocket. You know what Peter did is really like people had tried to do it for about 100 years, and this guy pulls it off. He essentially almost as like a hobbyist, with a bit of help, makes a rocket that reaches orbit. And, so I think that's symbolic of where we're at, which is, okay, Peter's maybe like a 1 in 7 billion engineer. But I think if you're smart enough and driven enough and have a bit of access to capital, you can make a rocket or a satellite company now, and that would have been impossible. Even just like 20 years ago, definitely 30 years ago, and so we're in this new era where we're going to see. We still don't know if the economics on this all shake out and what the businesses might look like, but people are going to have a chance to make their mark.
The in your book, I mean, you brought Peter Beck, which also came on the future of space. The book really kind of have this look at two different cultures. Peter Beck comes from a place where you don't try to break things. You take your time, and at one point he faces the reality that for the next step, he does have to kind of go beyond bigger and play the investment game. And then you have Astra, and you have the others. It's more the Silicon Valley, the software, and the entire framing, of their strategies about that. And it's breaking things, and Astra, trying to figure it out. And I don't know if it was intentional, but the chapter on Astra is much longer than Peter Beck and Planet, almost illustrating the underneath reality that when you break things, it does take longer. I don't know if it was intentional, but do you think that it's easier for someone to start from the place of Beck and moving forward than the reverse, like going from a place of breaking things and trying to figure it out, trying to realign your goals along the way?
It's a really good question. It's another one where I might be long-winded just because there's a lot going on there. Well, I would say, Rocket Lab and Astra are different in a couple senses. One is the sort of attitude and approach of the founder, and then the other is just kind of what they were trying to do as a company. Peter is wired to engineer kind of perfect things, and Electron, their rocket, is by most accounts just sort of this perfectly, you cannot really probably build a rocket that size any better than Rocket Lab has done. It's flown almost perfectly all the time. Peter's, when you go to his factory, you could eat off the floor. He's just very precise and exacting, and that's how he's wired. Chris Kemp with Astra, they were trying to do something different. I mean, they think Rocket Lab's perfectly engineered rocket is kind of too expensive, and they want to make cheaper, you could say sort of like dirtier rockets that you could knock out once a day and that just cost maybe one day like $1 million each. And so it's sort of this different goal. And Chris Kemp comes from Silicon Valley and from the software world, and so he was already at this extreme end of like the rocket design, and then he's like at the extreme end of let's see what happens when the Silicon Valley ethos is applied to aerospace, where traditionally we test everything and take years to make decisions and all of that. So you know so far, Rocket Lab's approach certainly looks like the better approach. If Astra is able to, it's going to be a pretty dicey year. They're tight on money. They have to get this next rocket to space, or it's really going to be hard for them. But if they're able to one day reach their goal, it's just a whole new thesis to look at. And the reason Astra's longer, was sort of, I spent so much time with Astra. It was this rare opportunity where I got to be with the company from the very first day they started their operations, and I went there probably 100 something times over the course of many years. I lived with the team in Alaska for weeks at a time trying to launch a rocket, and I wanted each section of the book to be a slightly different story. I mean, Peter's is meant to be kind of the platonic ideal of the engineer's hero's journey, and Astra's really the messier version of the engineering struggle of what this looks like on a day-to-day basis, just because I had the chance to be a fly on the wall for all of that.
It's interesting because reading the book, you find yourself. I found myself rooting more for Peter because you just mentioned the hero's journey, the guy who starts from nothing, and then just through his sheer passion and the work that he puts into it, and the desire to do something great. You're like, come on, and do it. And if it does, when the launch doesn't go right, you go, oh damn it. And then you read Chris Cap, and you feel like it's what's wrong with the idea of. And there's a line in the book that really kind of struck me, where Chris says that for him, success, his money, is having money in the bank account. And you can understand the entire ethos of, if this is more important, then obviously you're bound to fail if you're aiming more at raising money rather than finding solution. And there was another passage in the that connects to that also, in where you mentioned that Virgin Galactic in orbit had some of the best conditions of working. And the thought that was behind my mind is that, Astra, who focuses on a lot of money, Virgin Galactic and Orbit were like focusing on creating such the best culture to work with. Were they guilty of focusing on the wrong thing, which kind of make them victim of, of not having the right priorities?
It's a fascinating question. I mean, so part of this, I think, is the companies arrived at different stages in the evolution of commercial space. Like Elon starts SpaceX with this very lofty goal of setting up a colony on Mars, and then sort of builds a business around that idea. Peter comes along as like the ultimate underdog, and he's just sort of driven to make a rocket. It's just like in his blood, and he finds a way to do it. So everything you said makes a ton of sense. Chris and Astra, it's probably up to the reader if they sort of like feel it's good or bad or indifferent, but it's a different stage, right? I mean, part of the point of the book is like, this is a business now, and like, you don't have to just be trying to go to Mars for the human species. I mean, it's like, we're building sort of the FedEx of space. We just want to carry a lot of stuff into orbit, and it's a business. And part of what I wanted to get across in the book is like, almost every movie or story you've read about space it is our best and brightest, our most courageous pilots become astronauts, and the smartest people are working at NASA solving this crisis that's happening on the capsule, Apollo 13. And that's like every story about space. And like, commercial space is not like that anymore. I mean, this is just, it's the normal world. You've got welders from Texas, people coming from like car racing teams. You got people from the Navy. I mean, it's all walks of life working on these things, and so it comes with all these new trappings, And so I think you're right. I mean, Peter was maybe that last sort of perfect isn't the right word, but that last guy who was like this lone wolf for a bit, this underdog, and certainly wanted to make money, but was kind of like doing it because he had to. And part of this, the whole reason the book is called When the Heavens Went on Sale, is like, now it's still aspirational, of course, and inspiring, but it's a business.
Were you out of the two books? So Elon came out first. Now Heaven's on Sale. But obviously, what we discover from the latest your last book is that you could have written that book. I mean, before Elon, if you wanted to. Was there any moment in that process where you decided Elon is going to go first because I think he's in this arch of the story, like it's more complete, and the other one is not ready yet, and I'm going to put that to a little bit later?
Well, it's kind of funny. It didn't really kind of just didn't develop sort of like that. I am not like a space nerd or junkie by nature. I was not, I was like, I kind of enjoyed space like anyone might, but was not really knowledgeable in the field or sort of following it super closely when I was working on the Elon thing. It was mostly that I had become interested in this guy who when I first started really getting into Elon, it was around 2012, and people forget, but he had spent about 12 years, not quite in the wilderness, but like neither Tesla nor SpaceX were doing that great for a long time. And it was only that like in 2012, everything kind of started to work. SpaceX got to the ISS and Tesla came out with the Model S. And I was like, oh, this guy's interesting. He's finally kind of getting it. And so I started reporting on Elon, and then I started interviewing him and got interested. And then I went to visit the SpaceX factory in Los Angeles, and that's when I knew I had to do the book on him, because I expected to see this like relatively small factory with one rocket. I did not expect to go into what's essentially, it's right by LAX. I mean, it's like in the heart of Los Angeles. There's this massive factory. There were hundreds of people working on tons of rockets. And so I kind of got hooked by the energy and the ambition of the company. And then I probably could have like dropped space altogether, except that right as I finished the book, I just made a trip to New Zealand for my TV show and found Peter. And then I was like, oh my God, there's this, this is crazy. There's this like this maniac in New Zealand. He's pretty close too. He's got a rocket. He had 3 rockets on the factory floor. And then it just kind of kept coming one after the other. Oh, there's this startup over here. There's this crazy Ukrainian guys like funding a company in Texas. And so I just realized, I was like, this is like a story I want to follow. And part of it was, my favorite reporting from the Elon book was like just hearing the stories about the early days of SpaceX being on Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific, building this Falcon 1. It was just also ridiculous that you would have these engineers for like 6 years in the middle of nowhere making a rocket. And I sort of had this chance through Astra in particular to like kind of witness maybe what that was like. And so I just kind of wanted to live it, and I got sucked in and hooked by the excitement.
You said you were not a space nerd. I mean, the same for me. I mean, I didn't grow up looking at space thinking, or the typical kind of backstory that you hear from a lot of people that are in space. They were Star Trek fan, or they were Star Wars fan, or they've always either they wanted. When I was talking to Chris Bushheisen, he wanted to be an astronaut, but he couldn't become an astronaut, so he took the long way around. And now we see more and more people that are not space really related, but became space. Personally, my Apollo moment was seeing the 2 rockets landing upright. That it's there's something so crazy to see these things that are your brain is like is think that it's not real because it's so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
What was did you have an Apollo moment for you, or was that like a combination of bits and pieces?
Well, I think I probably sold like 1 million books that day that you're talking about, because I think you're not alone in how many people. I think that was like this. I think that was like the first time rockets like felt sort of futuristic and sci-fi again. We'd gone through like 60 years of them pretty much looking the same and doing the same thing, and yeah, it was like exciting when we sent an astronaut up, but a lot of that sizzle had like since Apollo, things just didn't change that much. It's kind of the problem, right? The commercial space is starting to solve. I think for me, it just went back to that SpaceX factory visit. It's hard to, it's weird because, you know, like as time passes, it feels so accepted of like where SpaceX is and what they've done. And we see the rockets going off all the time. But like in 2012, it was just, I had no idea that like in the middle of Los Angeles, where we're told like you can't manufacture anything in the United States, you definitely can't do it in California. I did not expect there to be this like massive operation going on, and it's the same thing I think that you're talking about. It was that energy, that enthusiasm, that something was new and different, and it's pretty funny too. Like what, you know, I don't know how many launch sites you've been to, but just from doing this book and other reporting, I go all over the place, you know, India, French Guiana, California, wherever. And they're not like the most modern looking facilities. You know, you go and you're sort of like expecting it to be sort of the highest, like cleanest kind of fanciest rooms that humans use, but they're not. And it's, you know, it's only if you go to like Rocket Labs, Mission Control, and it's like this very Darth Vader sort of aesthetic, or you look at like SpaceX's astronaut suits, that like now we're kind of like getting somewhere where this is like exciting again.
Yeah, the for 15 years that did, you know, my background was solo wilderness expeditions. Everything has to do about trying to reframe the story of a relationship with nature. Space was just, you know, it's part of that bigger world that we're in, but never did I think that, you know, that we would go. Seeing these two rockets landing upright, the light that went on in my head was understanding in that moment that the next step was going to be the same thing that we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years. The human species, that's what we do. We see an horizon and then we figure out how to go over there. And in between being there and where we are, it's just a question of figuring out the technologies. And you know, if you look at the bigger picture of life, it would be such a waste of investment to spend 3.6 billion years in developing complexity, only to remain on this tiny little dot in the universe when there's an entire place where you can go. So from life, this is, you know, it's been waiting for this moment for these billions of years, and now we're about to take it to a new place. I mean, did you find yourself kind of going into these big philosophical questions as you reported and witnessed these individuals that were kind of shaping the world of tomorrow?
I guess a bit. I mean, it's I like the it's fun you taking me back to that moment. Yeah, you know, I think it was just kind of like the spectacle of it all, that like you could tell something had changed, you know, and it was like, oh, maybe this guy really really can do this. Especially, you know, I remember writing the SpaceX book, and so many people are like, reusable rockets are impossible. Nobody's ever going to pull this off. It's such a waste of time. And you know, I think when when they stuck that landing, it was kind of like, are they? You know, it's the my book and like where my brain has been for the last 5 years is probably like a bit less philosophical about where like the human species is heading on the horizon you're talking about. I think I've spent so it's funny because we're talking about space, but I would say like my book kind of makes a case for the most like grounded version of space, which is just this building this infrastructure right over our heads. I think that is fascinating to me. You know, one of the companies in the book is Planet Labs, which, if people don't know, has surrounded the Earth with hundreds of image-taking satellites, and not even the CIA or China or Russia has anywhere near this number of satellites. Can look at what's happening on Earth. You know, Planet's fascinating because they're photographing every spot on Earth many times a day over a long period of time, and So like for the first time ever, we can count every freaking tree on the planet and like see if they're getting cut down in the Amazonian rainforest, like the minute some illegal cutting is happening, we can count like exactly how much carbon dioxide the trees are consuming. We can see kind of like the sum total of human activity and cost to the planet. I suspect planet satellites and satellites like them are going to become the basis of some meaningful changes to how we deal with climate change and put metrics around what companies and people do and the overall health of the planet. So I think this is like this fascinating philosophical moment where we're about to like understand our home from space in a way that we never could. I also don't think like people should not, Starlink, OneWeb, all of these satellite internet systems. I think people are kind of like mostly viewing this through the lens of this is like I'm just getting remote internet in some hard to reach place. You know, this is the first time where we are going to have this fully connected planet all the time. And there's a downside to that, especially for someone like you. When you're up on your mountain, your cell phone's going to work now and you're not going to get any peace. But on the other hand, this is the first time we really are going to have this fabric of this always on internet. It's going to totally change the way the world works. It's going to make so many things that we've been promised for years possible. And so I guess my frame is just a little more like looking from the heavens down onto earth and sort of what all this means. It's a very long answer. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's absolutely fine. And back to having the planet covered, I I will be the first one to admit that the benefits absolutely outweigh the realities of now suddenly you're always connected. Yeah, I mean, if you go out being connected with the people that you love or having a sense of security, information. I mean, I'm about to go and spend 4 months, Greenland, Iceland on the ship, going in these remote polar regions where even 100 years ago they were pushing the ice with wood, and being at the mercy of the elements. And now, I was talking to someone about crossing the Drake Passage, where back in those days they would set out, they would have no idea, what was ahead of them. Now, not only you're able to look at if there's a system coming, but even within that system, you can look where the height of the waves, so you can actually kind of navigate the storms in the same way that the planes now are able to navigate the system. So you're never really at the mercy. And, I was talking to Tanya from Planet and Chris from Planet, and how like Planet has changed. I mean, just with Ukraine, what happened when the volcano erupted in the Pacific, we're able to photograph it and see the shockwave traveling, across the planet, and all like having a bird's eye view and a more contextual frame of reference, and where we can understand the complexity, the connectedness of all this. I think it's just going to create, a new era. And so you start the book with Planet. This is your first, but even before that, setting the kind of the main character that allows all this to happen is this almost crazy general, Pete Warden. For a lot of people who don't know him, he's a character, but his story is even more of being a character. Do you think that from even Elon and all the others, do you think that they would exist without Pete existing?
Possibly. Oh, so like for people who don't know, Pete Warden is one of my favorite characters in the book. I think it's going to be quite a shock to people to know of his existence and his role in all of this. He's an astrophysicist by educational background, and then he ended up as a brigadier general in the Air Force and did a lot of black ops missions. He was one of the main people behind Star Wars, the kind of missile defense shield during the Reagan era. Just this very controversial, like sort of how you would think, kind of conservative in some ways, and comes from this military, but like always upsetting all of his bosses because he's always trying to do things more efficiently and different within this very bureaucratic world. And he ends up at as the head of NASA Ames, which is like the Silicon Valley NASA outpost, and he recruits all these young people, unconventional thinkers to NASA, and they end up starting Planet and Astra and a lot of companies. But to your point, Pete, going back to like the 1970s and 80s, was writing papers about, hey, instead of building one giant satellite that costs $1 billion and takes 10 years, I think we should make a bunch of small ones and see what they can do. And like, hey, we don't have to make every rocket huge and perfect. We could be nice to have some small ones that could just like go to space on a moment's notice. And so it was really putting these ideas out there very early. He was the one who got SpaceX some of its very first funding for the Falcon 1, and was like over Elon. He was essentially like the government sent him to be Elon's minder during the Falcon 1 day. So, I sort of, part of me thinks, okay, Elon was going to do whatever he was going to do, because he is that way and he's driven, and maybe the circumstances were right. But as I pretty much argue in the book, I think Pete was this figure behind the scenes that really laid the groundwork to make some of this thinking even believable, and also to make the government try it and like see what could happen. I think people will love Pete Worden. He's an exceptional human being.
He likes to call himself a bon vivant, and living in Luxembourg with
Yeah.
they don't call it the champagne over there; it's a crémant, so it's the bubble wine. I love him. He's such a character, and considering where Chris Bushhazen, when I've interviewed him, his 3 words of wisdom was where it takes time, and I think that Pete embodies that arc of how much he's been able to accomplish and how much work it took to, from where he started to having the impact of mentoring these young individuals. And you can see now how like his the role that he has played it continues, and now even with with the institute that he's doing, and promoting and continuing the connecting the dots. Fascinating. We will have the link in the comments for the book, and I invite everybody. It's an absolute amazing, wonderful read that really kind of gives you. There you go.
It's like attached to me now.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Ashlee, can you? So the book is coming out. I mean, at this recording, the time we're doing the recording, is just about to come out. By the time the podcast will be available, the book will be available. But beyond that, you're working also for a couple of TV shows, and you have another season of Hello World for Bloomberg. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's ahead for you besides the promotion for the book?
Yeah, I will try to switch gears from shilling myself on the book to shilling myself elsewhere. So for people who don't know, I make a technology travel show. I'm not claiming to be Anthony Bourdain, but people call it sort of like Bourdain style for tech. Instead of food, we do tech. Every country is a different episode, and so we've got 10 new episodes I've been filming the last few months all over the world. They start airing on July 3rd, one every week. We went to Kyrgyzstan, Nigeria. We did a crazy car race in the California desert. I think the show's gotten to a really good place. It's one of my favorite things to do. And then I've been working on, I sort of got into like documentaries, and unfortunately they're not like ready just yet. But starting next year on HBO and elsewhere, I should have a few documentaries coming out. Some on space, and then some sort of more far afield on just other tech that I'm interested in, like longevity technology, and there's one I would love to tell people about, but I can't just yet. But that one will go back to some ground I've trod before, and so yeah, just kind of this mix of writing and TV and film.
So you're at the front of, you're like really, you have your nose into all these individuals that are trying to solve and make the world a better place. And at the same time, we have these really strong narratives out in the media and the world that that is more focused on the world could disappear tomorrow. We just had the one of the big guys at Google that resign,
Jeff
yeah,
Hinton.
from
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah, I've interviewed Jeff.
But at the same time, there's Ron Lapierre in the New Yorker that just came out saying, "Listen, like I think we're blowing things out of proportion. AI is still a tool. We have to stop, you know, putting it into an artificial intelligence doesn't give it credit. It's a technology, and where at the end of the day, the success of the human species has been our capacity to manage these technologies." But if we're going to think that AI is this entity that's going to decide by its own, then it's not going to help us moving forward. So having these two really kind of conflicting stories, but you've physically experimenting and meeting these people, do you remain with more of a, not a naive, but more of an optimistic understanding of the future, rather than thinking that like we're constantly, avoiding the blow up of the planet?
I do. Outside of AI, I think we had this sort of pendulum swing where the press was very favorable to technology for a long time, and then sort of, kind of the rise of Facebook and some of the election stuff was this moment where like, oh no, we've been too nice to technology. Let's swing the pendulum back the other way. And now I think it's gone way too far where like anybody doing anything in tech is sort of like assumed to be evil and with poor motives. And look, I mean, it's the biggest industry in the world. It's the most sort of influential, and obviously not everybody is going to be good who goes at it, and there's real questions. But in particular, doing Hello World, where I travel around and just meet so many clever, especially young people. It is like it's hard for me not to have an optimistic outlook on where the world is going. I think people underestimate. Yes, something like AI is scary, and we're gonna have to deal with it, and it seems to be advancing very quickly. But like we have so many tools at our disposal. The tech industry was really like siloed in Silicon Valley for so long. Part of the reason someone like Peter Beck can exist is because 10 people with a workstation and some computer aided design software can do like what used to take thousands of people in a NASA supercomputer. And this is happening the world over. You've got young, enthusiastic, optimistic people solving problems, trying to solve problems everywhere. And so, anyway, I'm sort of optimistic by nature, and you would think maybe my job would maybe push me the other way, but it just makes me more optimistic by what I see. So, proceed with caution, but yes, overall, I wake up pretty happy.
No, it's the same here. We have, unfortunately, I think we tend to think that the human species is static. Even also like nature is static. Poor animals are not going to be able to adapt and adjust, when in reality that's what nature does by default. It's a world of constant tension and disruptions, and animals are constantly uh, negotiating their place in that ecosystem, and that idea of equilibrium is really from a far perspective, because when you look at the minute of it, is in constant, disruptions and creation and destruction. The human species is not a static species. What we do, we're constantly adjusting with the challenges that comes with us. It's easy to look back and say, oh, we cannot compare AI to fire, which is another tool, because of what we think of fire today. But back in those days, the arrival of fire would have been really easy to say, oh my God, this is going to destroy the world, because now one person can suddenly set fire and then everything is going to disappear. But we find a way forward. This is what we do. And AI will be challenging. There's going to be a tremendous spirit of adaptation and trying to reassess, how can we manage it so that it doesn't, become a big problem. But this is what we do. Now, Ashlee, I want to be super mindful of your busy schedule. You're on a promoting tour, so I don't want to go over the time limits. So being with all these people, writing the book, being in TV, having a family, having kids, what would be like if you had a book that says Ashlee's 3 words of wisdom? What would be those 3 words?
Am I allowed to swear, or does that hurt your YouTube rankings? No. I mean, the biggest thing I think I learned, partially from reporting on Elon and then partially from living life these last 10 years, is just be fucking persistent. I mean, you can be really bright, you can be lucky, you can do all sorts of things and they help, but my God, I just think sort of everything I've been working on feels like it's almost collapsed at some point over the last 10 years, and you just kind of keep at it, and it ends up becoming the most rewarding thing you've done, and is painful and ugly along the way sometimes, but it's this attribute that it's not genetic. You can do it, if you put your mind to it. And I think it makes up for an awful lot of sort of genetic or socioeconomic gifts.
It's the same can be applied to whether it's a relationship or even the kids. That's the idea that you can find one person. Well, I mean, often when people ask me, Dano, what's your advice for finding the perfect job or the perfect partner or the perfect all this? My answer is always find the ones that even in the worst times you still want to be there.
Let's check the dedication of my book. My wife, she fit the bill on that one, on this one. Yeah, no, I agree, man.
Because life is challenging by nature. Growth and transformation is challenging. So if we're looking for these places that are not going to be challenging, then the growth is not going to happen. The transformation, the innovation is not going to happen. And the thing that often it's hard, life is messy by design. We try to make it as a 100% perfection sanitized, but by design, life is messy. Your path to a mistake is exactly the same pattern in innovation. It's just a hindsight that gives you, well, that worked and that didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Elon's this incredibly polarizing figure, and for good reason. He kind of heaps most of it on himself, but discount things he spouts off and stuff like that. I mean, and this impression of him as whatever some people have as a genius and all this stuff. Okay. But his biggest attribute really is hanging around, and sort of just, suffering through stuff when other people wouldn't. And whether you like him or not, I always take away at the end of the day is, the world has moved toward electric cars, whether Tesla exists or not, that one's done. And that would not have happened without him, and commercial space has happened, and SpaceX, could go away tomorrow and it would be a blow, but this will continue, and whatever change he ushered in is stuck, and in hindsight, it like looks like maybe like a clearer path than it was, but it was really just hanging around and like sticking with it when probably a lot of other people would have given up. So it's kind of like amazing what you can accomplish in, we forget too, it's like 20 years, imagine what you can accomplish in 20, everything feels like it has to be an overnight success or something, but 20 years isn't actually that long of a time to do. It's incredible what you can do if you put your mind to it.
Just one more question, Ashlee. So there's often this idea that, like in the music world, you need to be crazy doing drugs to come out with these songs that will just defy, the reality. You need to be able to like come from a place of suffering, to be the artist. In technology or innovation, there's the idea that you have to be borderline mad and not always a nice person. We look at Howard Hughes, we look at Steve Jobs, we look at Edison and Tesla. Do you think that unfortunately there's a bit of reality that if you're going to redefine what is possible, if you're going to go beyond that scale that is just so hard, like to comprehend, you do need to be either totally dismissive of the rest and kind of abrupt and kind of wanting to disrupt what is around?
Oh man, it's such a fascinating question. It's one I think about all the time, sort of by nature of the people I cover. Like if you look at just at this last book that I wrote, you've got at least 4, maybe like 6 very distinctive personalities leading quite ambitious enterprises, and they all go about it in like totally different ways. Whether you have to be, I don't think you have to be like a jerk. But it works for some people. I would say while they go about it differently, I would say they do seem to share this, just this like rejection of the status quo, and this, like this belief in what they're doing, which is like outside of the norm, and is going to be hard, but I do think you do have to have that almost religious conviction. It's like there has to be, it seems like some place of irrationality where you just believe in yourself no matter what. I think to get over like some of the other stuff we talked about before, because like nobody else is really going to believe in you at some point. They don't all start believing till it works. And so you need something between here and there. I think, like someone like Elon is, quite frankly, just often not the nicest person to be around, although he can be incredibly charming and interesting to be around. But obviously like very hard on his workers, and quite, but it works. It clearly works for him. It's hard to think of another person who's able to marshal tens of thousands of people in such a productive way. Do I think like everyone should be like that? It'd probably be like a pretty miserable world if everyone, every boss was like that. But I just think it does take a bit of that that sort of reality distortion field.
I think if the world was full of entrepreneurs, I'm not too sure it would be a fun world to be in. You need to have a certain balance. I just hope that, you look at Howard Hughes, who, his genius also turned him into a crazy person at one point. You look at Steve Jobs, his obsessiveness into certain things also turned him into its weakness, and the way that he ate at the end. Like it was not necessarily the healthiest person.
Yeah.
And that was all part of the package. And when Elon bought Twitter, I'm like, I just hope that that's not going to become his Waterloo moment of suddenly going beyond where you're supposed. What makes you great also becomes your weakness. I just hope.
It will be
Um,
interesting to see these things. Sort of just as you were pointing out. I mean, Howard Hughes didn't totally start out that way, and Steve Jobs didn't either, and Elon didn't. Um, as you age and your life goes through different cycles, these things appear to have like a tendency to veer towards the extreme as you get older.
well, Ashlee, don't go crazy on us. Keep reporting the good stories, and I can't wait to see the next series for Hello World and your next book and the TV shows and everything. And I look forward for a path to cross and sit down and continue that conversation.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for reading the book and the time. I really appreciate it, mate.
No, thank you for sending it. It was a pleasure reading it. Have a good day.
All right, mate. You too.